A lot of people don't understand how deep it is with astrology and the ancients, and that everything that they did was based on astrology. And really, up until the medieval times, everything that the people did, even in England and Europe, was based on astrology. And as I will show you in the upcoming videos, how basically everything is dealing with astrology and based off of that when you really begin to understand. So, this video is no different, uh, but people need to understand the aspects of Osiris as well as these other deities that we know are equated with Osiris and why it all come together and makes sense. So most Christians believe when we talk about Osiris that we basically worship Osiris. When we talk about these Egyptian gods, we basically worship them. We chose to choose Egyptian gods over Jesus Christ and the prophets in the Bible, and that all this stuff is basically, just us accepting Egyptian stuff over biblical stuff when we clearly have proof of the Egyptian stuff and no proof of the biblical stuff. Now, if you watch the videos, of course, you understand now that when we're talking about Osiris, when we're talking about these gods, that they represent different aspects of reality that exists. So with Osiris, he represents many things, as we'll get into in this video. Not just the backbone, not just agriculture, but many spiritual things, as well as the other Egyptian gods. But of course, when we go into Christianity, Jesus is supposed to be a real man that existed. Moses is supposed to be a real man that existed. And a lot of people don't understand the esoteric background behind these characters and what they really represent. Only with the ancient Egyptians and other, ancient cultures, we see that they created these beings, but they did not hide the aspects of which they belong to. They made them to help teach about these aspects and to get people to understand what these things represent. And to better get people to understand is to create stories around them. So if you're not into that understanding, you need to understand that first, before we get into everything. This is going to be a very good, very deep video, and you're going to learn a lot. It's going to connect a lot of dots for you guys. So now we heard the story of Osiris. So we know it's metaphorical. You have, depending on which version of the story that you have heard or read, you have Osiris. We know Set chops him up into 13 pieces. 12 pieces are found. One is not, and that's his penis or the phalanx. And we know that Isis and Nephthys goes out and finds these pieces. And Isis hovers over him as a hawk and makes his penis grow and impregnates herself and gives birth to Horus. And you also have the story where, they go out and find him and he becomes the god of the underworld. Basically, in both stories, you have to understand the whole aspect of god of the underworld and what does that mean. So when we look at Osiris and we look at Osiris in the underworld, this is what we usually see. And this is from the Book of the Dead with Ani. And we see Osiris in the underworld, and we have so many references to Osiris in the underworld. But this depiction here is basically this. And we see this and we see the zodiac. So while we have the representation of Jesus, and we understand Jesus means he represents a few things, Jesus himself alone represents the sun. He represents you as well. So does Osiris represent us and the sun as well. But Osiris alone represents the sun. He also represents all 12 signs of the zodiac. The disciples for Jesus represents the 12 signs of the zodiac. And how Osiris represents the entire zodiac is because he was chopped up in 14 pieces. 13 pieces were found. Those 13 pieces represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, and Osiris being the sun as well, the sun as well. The piece that was missing, of course, represents the phalanx. And of course, the phalanx represents the sun, the obelisk. So when you go back and you look at the obelisk and all the depictions of it and what it represents, it's a representation of the sun. So we know Osiris also represents the Jed. And the death of Osiris is called the fall of Osiris. It represents his fall. Do you think it's a coincidence that when you die, we say, you fall when you die? When a soldier dies, we say we have a fallen soldier. And we also have a season called fall. And what happens during the fall? The leaves basically die, they fall off the tree. So again, we have to understand it's not a play on words and that these words, it means something for a reason. So Osiris representing agriculture and representing growing the crops and nature and everything like that. Uh, this representation of his fall is giving you exactly that understanding of the fall. So this relief right here is called the fall of Osiris or the rising of Osiris. But all it is this. It's the fall equinox or the autumn or autumn equinox. Ra represents the rising sun, Atum the setting sun. Combined, you get Re Atum, who passes through the underworld every night. So when we see the cross of the zodiac, the vertical line represents the rise or fall. The horizontal line represents life and death. Rise is life, fall is death. So underneath this line represents the underworld, which is showing you that Osiris is the god of the underworld. When you see the depiction of Osiris being laid out, it's representing that justice, horizontal line across the zodiac. And he represents the underworld because, again, we're talking about the fall equinox. We're talking about stuff that's happening underneath this equator. So we know that line really is the equator. Things that's happening during this time is what Osiris is representing. And it's simply that. So they show you, and it's all geometry, it's all math, it's science. They're showing you these vertical lines and they're showing you these degrees basically on a circle, which is, masonry when you get into it, but basically to represent the zodiac itself, which, as I said, is really the key to everything when you understand the zodiac. So this depiction, again, is representing the rise or fall of Osiris, depending on where you want to place it at. And below that line is the underworld. So Osiris is the god of life, death, resurrection, vegetation, agriculture, etc. Represents us, he represents the sun, and many other things. So the raising and lowering of the Jed is basically talking about the Corex festival, which I talked about before. When you understand during the Corex festival, you have that little man, which is Osiris, is in the shape of Osiris, and you see the wheat and barley growing from him. So when you look at the depiction, you can see that he's laying horizontally. So when you're in your coffin, when you're dead and gone, you lay horizontally. You lay flat on your back, or that's basically the death position. And we see it with our arms crossed and us laying flat on our back. So that Osiris laying horizontally symbolizes life during the Corex festival. The wheat and barley that's growing up is symbolizing resurrection or life from the underworld. It symbolizes rebirth or growth. So Isis, when she's growing the penis of Osiris, you basically have Osiris giving birth to himself, when you understand. So what does that sound like? When you look at the depiction, you see he's basically impregnating Isis to give birth to himself. It's the same thing as Jesus. Osiris is a god. He gives birth to himself, who he is the same as Horus, which is why Horus kills Set, because it's basically Osiris giving birth to himself through Isis. So he is also the father and he's also the son, you understand. So it's the same representation with Jesus. You have God impregnating Mary and giving birth to himself. And this is one of the reasons why the story is all confused. And some people don't want to say, well, Jesus is not God and so on and so forth. So they can throw shade on the fact that it equals with the Egyptian story of Osiris. Because Osiris is basically giving birth to himself, just like with Jesus. So basically, this right here is the same as this. Take a look at it. I know it's going to blow people's mind, but it's the same exact thing. You have Jesus representing the sun. You have the 12 disciples. The same thing with Osiris, who he himself represents the sun, and also the 12 signs of the zodiac, just like the disciples represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. So you got to start putting this stuff together and understand we're talking about the same stuff. And as we go on, you're going to see what other deities is getting into the same exact thing that's going back to one understanding. We're talking about stars, we're talking about the universe. So you have autumn, which is basically fall, starting September 22nd and ends December 21st, which is the start of the winter solstice, as we all know. And then we know the whole story with Jesus Christ and the whole thing with that and what that entails is the same stuff. So you have the rising and lowering of the Jed, which deals with the solstice and equinox. So now the solstice is when the sun is basically the furthest away from the equator during Earth's rotation. And you have the equinox, which is basically when it's at its closest distance from the equator. So Isis rising and lowering the Jed and Mary holding Jesus is all symbolic. It's talking about the precession of the equinox and the solstice. So when we look at the depictions, they are the same, talking about the same thing, both representing the sun. So now we know Osiris represents many things. So when we look at this depiction of the Last Supper, these 12 disciples don't only represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. They don't also just represent, the seasons. They also represent planets and constellations. And when you look at this and you compare it to the Ani's Book of the Dead with Osiris, as I said, it's the same. But this becomes this. So as I said, you are the sun. Jesus and Osiris represents the sun. So when we're talking about the underworld, when it's talking about judgment, it's simply talking about the sun's journey through the constellations, which is our journey through the constellations. That's all it's talking about. When it's talking about Osiris being the god of the underworld, the sun is taking that journey to the underworld, plain and simple. So we're talking about, as I said, that horizontal line, which is basically, you have to look at it as a zodiac, a circle, and understand that below that line during this time frame, which would be the winter solstice, is the sun, going through that period. But the sun also making its entire journey through all the constellations is what it's representing when it's talking about Osiris. So in the book of Revelations, Jesus says, I'm the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and end. And we know that Osiris is also referred to as the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and end. That's what these represent. So just like God is Jesus, Osiris is Horus. So you have God basically giving birth to Jesus, or having Mary give birth to Jesus with no penis. The same symbolic thing with Osiris and Isis. There was no penis. It's symbolic. And it's the same exact thing when you really look at it. So get that understanding. Same thing. Same beings we're talking about. Same situation with the sun. Same thing with the zodiac. It all makes sense when you begin to understand and look into everything. So remember the Sphinx. And we're talking about Alpha, Omega, beginning, and end. The Sphinx represents the beginning, if you remember. So the Sphinx represents Leo, which Leo faced, the Sphinx faced Leo between 10 and 30,000 years ago, which we know the Egyptians called the Zeptepi, or the first time. So when the moon is in Leo, it marks the beginning of a cycle, a monthly cycle. When the moon is in Cancer, it marks the end of a cycle. So the moon in Leo represents the right eye of Horus. When it's in Cancer, the left eye, which is basically the Alpha and Omega. But it's much deeper than this, as I'm going to break down right here. But first, understand, as we know, Jesus in the end of Revelations, Revelations 22:16, he says, I am the bright and morning star. Osiris is also referred to as the bright and morning star. We know Lucifer, Satan, is referred to as the bright and morning star, but we know the bright and morning star is Venus. And in the Bible, in the NIV, they made sure that they put that Lucifer as the bright and morning star. And as I said, we know Venus represents the bright and morning star, but a lot of people had no clue that Jupiter is also referred to as the bright and morning star. Now, again, all this stuff is going to come together in a second, but my main goal is to get you guys to understand that these things that we're talking about, as I alluded to in the beginning, when we're getting into Osiris, these main gods are all talking about the same thing. When we get into Jesus, when we get into God, when we get into Horus and Osiris, we're talking about the same exact stuff. And that everything that we're talking about, the main deities, the main topic of all these so-called religions, is going back to astrology, the planets, and the constellations, which is everything still today and was everything back in the ancient world. Now, as I said, many people have no clue as Jupiter being the bright and morning star. Now, it says in Job 38:7, it says, when the morning stars sang together and all the children of God shouted for joy, implying what? That there's more than one morning star. Now, Jupiter would naturally not be looked at because, it's the biggest planet, it's the big dog. So people not look into it as, the bright and morning star. It's like, okay, well, if Jupiter was this bright star, you would think we would see it much more than Venus, since it's, small. You got to understand the importance of Jupiter. Albert Pike said this: his power was symbolized by an eye over a scepter. The sun was termed by the Greeks the eye of Jupiter and the eye of the world, and his is the all-seeing eye in our lodges. And Osiris was invoked as the god that resides in the sun and is enveloped by his rays, the invisible and eternal force that modifies the sublunary world by means of the sun. And just go back to Greek mythology, where you have the Greeks using the planets and basically identifying them as gods, as I talked about before. So you have Jupiter being this, all-powerful god, which would be the Roman equivalent to basically Kronos or Saturn or God or Zeus. When you start breaking all this stuff down, it's talking about the same thing. You have the Greek version, you have the Roman version, and you go back to ancient Kemet, it's talking about the same stuff. And it's one of the reasons why I said before, when the Romans conquered the Greeks, why did they continue Hellenization? Why did they continue these customs? They just changed the names of these gods. Why would they continue on with this whole ideology, which is basically Greek mythology, but make Roman mythology corresponding to these same Greek beings? That tells you it means something for them to take it. And then once again, they took it again and gave us, biblical religion as we know today. So it's coming from the same stuff. Now, when Jesus was born, there were 3 stars. And we know about the wise men, the magi, who basically followed the 3 stars. So you got to understand what it's talking about here. 3 stars. One of those stars is basically Regulus. The other 2 is Jupiter and Venus. Now, the key to this whole thing is in the wording, is in how it's said. So if you look at Isaiah 14:12, we know it's talking about how you have fallen from heaven, a morning star, referring to Lucifer. And we know how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. Same type of situation. But again, you also have Jesus saying in Revelations that I am the bright and morning star. So what does that mean? Bright and morning star. That's 2 things. When you see the word and. So bright and morning star. So you have Regulus, when he's talking about the bright and morning star, it's talking about Jupiter and Venus, which is the bright and morning star. So there's only one thing he could be referring to, of course, as I said, when Jesus was born, 3 stars. Jesus is talking about his birth. He's giving you an identity, a clue to who he is. So if he's saying he's the bright and morning star, the only way we can go back and figure out what that corresponds to is his birth, which we have a bright and morning star. Now we're talking about in real life here, when you put it together. So there's only one time of year that Jesus could have been born, and that's in June. This is why you see so much of the talk about, Christmas is a sham. Jesus wasn't born in Christmas. He had to be born in June. There's no way in the world, in December, you're going to be outside at night, giving birth to a baby. And none of it makes sense to astronomers when you start looking at, the stars and what could it possibly have been talking about with the 3 stars being in the sky. So the clue, again, is in the wording, bright and morning star. So you have Jupiter being the brightest planet in the night sky. That's the bright star. You have the morning star, the bright star, Jupiter, the morning star being Venus, which is the first star, first light you see. If you're observing in the morning, you're going to see the light of Venus. So the thing is, between June 17th and the 30th, you have, during this time of the year, you have Jupiter and Venus come so close together where it looks like they're touching. It looks like one huge star. because they're so close together, far as looking at conjunction. So you have them come so close together, and it looks like one bright star. So when he says, I'm the bright and morning star, it's referring to Jupiter and Venus. So Venus is Lucifer, the light bringer. Easy to put together. Why? So Jupiter is God. So you have Venus, Lucifer, Jupiter, God. The Romans call Jupiter the father of gods and kings. And we know Lucifer is Venus. Venus is Lucifer. Lucifer is the light bringer. And you can make that connection easily understanding that the first light we would see, or the light bringer we would see, would be Venus in the morning. So Lucifer, son of the morning, which is light of the morning. Lucifer, the light bringer. It's easy to put this stuff together as it's corresponding to planets and constellations and what have you. But the Romans called Jupiter, as I said, the father of gods and kings. So you had Julius Caesar and you had Augustus, who both said that Jupiter was their father and Venus was their mother. So Jupiter, being just this, the biggest planet, was of course going to be put in that same realm as gods and kings. We talk about Saturn a whole lot, but more than Saturn, we see the worship of Saturn all the time, but more than Saturn, Jupiter is worshipped more in secret. Jupiter is the main god, it's the big god. But you have Julius Caesar being born in July, and during that month, it's when you have to the east of Jupiter this alignment with Venus, which is one of the reasons why he said what he said about being father and mother. But Julius Caesar was also the high priest of Jupiter Ammon, or Zeus Ammon. As I showed you guys when I went to the Cairo Museum, I showed you the head of Zeus Ammon. It's the same as Jupiter Ammon. And we know this stuff exists. It was in the Greco-Roman section in the Cairo Museum. And this stuff is there. Like I said, they don't hide this stuff. All the stuff is there, showing you exactly where all this stuff corresponds back to. It's representing when you understand duality, plain and simple, masculine and feminine energies. So the thing with Jupiter is both male and female, while Venus is female. We've seen Jupiter as, strong male, but Jupiter has also been represented by women. Isis, Ishtar, Tammuz, all representing Jupiter, as well as Jupiter being this strong, dominant, masculine force. These three are all the same by different names. It's giving you androgyny. It's giving you the masculine and feminine energies, the yin and yang that make up us, but also all going back and referring to the sun, the moon, so on and so forth. This is all the same stuff in different aspects. As I said, Lucifer has many different aspects. Satan has many different aspects. So does God, so does Jesus, so does Osiris, and all these beings are all going to be corresponding and going back to each other, giving you different understandings and different aspects of what they represent, basically during different times of the year. It's that simple. During different transitions through the zodiac. Still corresponding with the sun, still corresponding with us, being the sun in our same masculine and feminine transitions that we have when we are basically going through the cycle of the zodiac. The zodiac represents all of us. And all of us understanding that in different incarnations, you went through the zodiac. So you had to go through the whole cycle. Think about the sun going through the whole cycle of the zodiac, and then your energy, your soul or spirit experiencing different energies during different times at different periods when the sun is in different constellations of the zodiac. And then you come full circle and you have all these experiences, which goes back to the nine. As I said, we are the nine, all of us, born in the 1800s, born in the 1900s, we are the nine, representing the completion of us going through all the cycles of the zodiac and coming back full circle. And now we have the opportunity in this incarnation of moving forward if we can unite the masculine and feminine energies and not, escape the will of reincarnation and everything that entails. Because, of course, there's no way of knowing. We don't know, what's going to happen if you don't. As I showed you guys in that video, the power of nine, is understanding how everything that has been happening is corresponding with this astrology, is corresponding to what the ancients have, researched and talked about for thousands of years on this planet. So now we know Lucifer is a god, Osiris is a god, Satan is the god of this planet, as the Bible tells us, and Osiris and Lucifer are basically, representing the Alpha and Omega. Osiris and Jesus, Alpha and Omega. It's all the same stuff, as I said, when you get into it. So you have to understand Lucifer. The literal translation, the Greek translation of Lucifer means phosphorus. And that would be the Latin to Greek translation. So H.P. Blavatsky tells you like this. She says, and now it stands proven that Satan, or the red fiery dragon, the Lord of Phosphorus, and Lucifer, or light bearer, is in us. It is our mind. Think about that. What does that mean? It is in us. It is our mind. And there are many comparisons between Satan, Lucifer, and Phosphorus. If you look, you're going to see a lot on what that all entails. But phosphorus is a key element that's essential in all life forms, plain and simple. Without phosphorus, we wouldn't be able to basically exist energetically under the sun. It is phosphorus that allows us to deal with the sun, period, on every single level. It is phosphorus. Phosphorus is super important in ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, DNA and RNA. It's in our DNA, it's in our RNA. It's ADP, which is going to be transferring the energy and putting it where you need the energy at. Super important is phosphorus. And when phosphorus is mixed chemically with oxygen, you get phosphate. So you have phosphorus and you have phosphate. These are two essential, important elements in the building blocks of life, plain and simple. So you have the alpha and omega at the beginning and end, corresponding with Osiris, Jesus, Satan, God, whoever you want to put it with. So now you have phosphorus exists in soil, it exists in rocks. Phosphate is an electrically charged particle. Now, those particles act as organic or inorganic fertilizers in soil and, basically coming from the rocks. Phosphate fertilizers are basically super vital to agriculture. And when you look at this phosphorus and phosphate cycle, you can see that, they are everything, because phosphorus and phosphate allows us, as I said, to organically deal with light and, as our energetic self. We couldn't exist without phosphorus. So as I said, it's essential to agriculture, and we can see clear as day who is the god of agriculture. Osiris. Who is the god of fertility? Osiris. Of growth. We're talking about this phosphorus going into the soil and allowing things to grow, and it's representing the rebirth, just like Osiris. When you look at the depictions, you can see clear as day what it's talking about. But there's more to this, of course. So it's one of the reasons why you have Osiris being green is because when phosphorus mixes with oxygen, it creates this green glow. And we know Osiris being the jed, which is the backbone. You also have a sugar backbone. You have a DNA backbone. You have a phosphorus backbone. It's not just the actual spine, but it's dealing with so many different backbones of these things we're talking about. And as I said, they didn't make these words correspond with these things for no reason. It all goes back to the same stuff, and it just starts to boggle your mind as to how deep it goes back as to where they created this English language to make sure that backbone corresponds to something that's going to be represented with, associated with Osiris. So now all these things was ascribed to Osiris long before Lucifer, long before Satan, long before anything biblical was created. So we always go to the originator and say, these are aspects of Osiris that our ancient ancestors understood and knew and ascribed to him. So again, when we're talking about Osiris, when we're talking about all these different aspects and things that he represents, it's more than just, some god to worship. And that's one of the things we try to get religious people out of the habit of just wanting to worship. Understand. I always get that question from Christians. If we don't worship Jesus, who do we worship? I don't want to worship Osiris. I don't want to worship Isis. And they look at this stuff, oh, y'all worshiping cows and goats and all this kind of stuff. And they look at this stuff as being silly, yet they don't think it's silly to, worship a man that, you can't prove he exists, that supposedly walked on water and all the other goofy shit that we see in the Bible. Um, it's crazy. But another one of the reasons why I wanted to put this out was to get you guys into this understanding so you can be ready and have this knowledge to defend what you believe or what you know to be true. And you got to just, you know, understand. There's a lot of people that's on YouTube that's giving y'all false information about Osiris. You're going to read stuff about Osiris actually existing. Remember, I told you guys when last time I was in Egypt, I went to the tomb of Osiris. Man, they found a tomb that's supposedly dedicated to Osiris, and I paid $1,000 to go down there. And you can't take no pictures, no photos. You can't even bring your phone down there. You can just go and see with your own eyes. And one of the things that I wanted to see for myself was the understanding of what Osiris was trying to represent, other than fertility and everything. It's the message that you find there, fittingly so, in Saqqara, where you have the whole Sphinx, they call it, and the whole association with Leo and the constellations, and then that being there, giving you the understanding that Osiris, who is the god of the underworld, the god of agriculture, is telling you to leave. So he's basically saying, when you're done here, get the fuck out of here. Don't come back here. Go to